And the idea with this talk is very much trying to summarize some of the thoughts and reflections that we have arrived at, or what that we're working with the project now, especially in the final end. So I will try to sort of summarize it, which and the reflections that we have related to the sort of the conditions of services, which I have divided up into to three parts, which is the market, the forest owners, and the forest, and what are sort of the implications in relation to these three different areas, and how are we perceiving them through the how we are we perceiving them and reflecting upon them within relation to the project. To start up with, then, the market as itself, the service market and the forest-related service market. And what we have seen within the project is that there is a lot of services available, but that the majority of these services are more traditional one, in the sense that are related to forestry and timber production to great extent. Over the last 10-15 years, there has been a growing numbers of new services, both in the sense that sort of new developed services, but also sort of repacking or rebranding of sort of old services to better fit the market environment and perceived customers. But still, the majority of the services are still sort of the more traditional ones within this area. And also sort of the digitalization has also been a driving factors to trying to incorporate digital solutions that also trying to incorporate more of the forest owners when they move further away from the properties, or when they move to larger cities and so on, which has also been a key sort of factor and driver within the service development, is sort of the knowledge and perception about sort of the new forest owners or the distant forest owners, and we still feel that there is although that this sort of new forest owners has been discussed for over 10, 15, 20 years almost, to some extent, it's still a bit uncertain what it actually the implications is, and how it actually will be able to incorporate these new two forms of challenges related to a shifting cultural and social setting within these traditional forestry organizations. But we also see in relation to that, and also the service offered, that there is a growing interest for sort of other values that is connected to services, but that is more often sort of a smaller branch within many of the servicing larger servicing companies. And also, given this kind of structures of the market, and also the marketing actors and the service provider, there is still a strong timber orientation, and also this tradition of services being sold in relation to timber procurement, or within that type of relationships, also then in different ways shapes both the characteristics and values of the services, but also the market in general, especially when we talk about price, with regards to how do we price a forest management plan in relation to a timber sale, or separate, and how is customers prepared to pay for different types of services, both sort of new but also old ones, giving sort of new business arrangements and so on. And when we then come down also to the service provider, we also see that there is a strong dominance in both Finland and Sweden of larger organizations with the focus on timber procurement, that sells and contract services to different groups of forest owners, and also having, in many cases, quite often then subcontracting to smaller actors within. So that also shapes sort of the structure of the market, given these sort of larger actors and both their opportunities, but also potential restraints in how they are developing and what they see is beneficial in terms of service developments. And a recurring question within the project and sort of also the engagement or the way in focus of the project is also sort of, but there is no demand for this type of services, or there is no that, and often that comes back to sort of a traditional understanding of the market that is something that is driven by needs and rational choices, which we see is maybe more complex than that. That is, there's not always demands that is given, which then required to really understand. So the opportunity also required more complex understanding and reflection over both the social cultural situations and conditions of service offering within the settings, and then which also then comes down to sort of what are the possibilities to actually think outside of the box norms and traditions with regards to how easy is it to think new and also demand new things when you potentially don't really have a good understanding of those opportunities and so on. You in many cases you often see what sort of is front of you and that you are used to. So demand is also something that can be, there's not only something that is asked for, but also something that can be potentially driven to some extent. And the market then of course also then have implications of the relationship to the forest owners and the consumer in this sense, both in the ways that how is it possible to get forest owners to participate and get them engaged within the servicing provision processes. How do we, coming back to Anders' talk yesterday, how do we think and relate to decision making? What is it actually then to being informed and making rational decisions in relation to services? And what we see is also sort of this kind of shifting social context, as I talked before about increased urbanization and so on of forest owners, where this kind of traditional structures of forest ownership and the sort of more traditional local settings where services and timber relations previously have taken place are shifting. And how is it possible then to adapt these types of settings, especially sort of looking at the sort of larger sales organization, that has still a very strong foot within the traditional market segments that relates to timber, and how is it possible to also incorporate other types of segments within those kind of organizations and those kind of sales processes, which is crucial then to reflect upon, which then also then comes down to this kind of the communications that is being used that Mario talked about yesterday. Also the segmentations, raising this kind of more critical questions of sort of for whom is actually segmentation done and what are the limitations and how do we need to work with these types of tools within the sales process, and also the value propositions. How do we actually get people to understand the values of the services that is being provided, and how do we also ensure the experience and the interactions that is positive throughout the whole process of service provision, where it's not only the service itself that affects the outcomes, but also the general process of servicing that includes infrastructures, different types of persons that are part of that process, and which then also then come down to the relationship of trust, which we can see there is a larger focus now on these type of issues in order to build more more sustainable and long-term relationship, especially trying to bridge this physical challenges that the forest sector is facing, and where we also see sort of adaptations of sort of customer relationship management and so on in this competitive environment. But I will also say that sort of the relationships itself is not something new. It's has always been there within. It's just that it's a changing social settings and social conditions that pushes new types of relationships and new types of basis for relationships and how we can develop them. But we also have seen in the interaction workshops that we have had is there is a lack of balance and this kind of win-win situations that is a focus of the servicing, which then constitute a challenge for trust, which values are actually prioritized within the sales interactions, and where we and also sort of how do we perceive when a customer have a bad experience from a service provision? What is that due to? Is it and I would argue that of course we can reflect upon the practicalities that relates to it, but it's also important to actually think about what are the challenges. And what we also seen that there is a request for sort of independent and objective assessments of services, which I also think is then as a symptom of this kind of lack of trust, and also feeling that your values is acknowledged within different services in different settings. Forest. And of course, all this, how the market and the relationships are formed, also then have implications on the forest and how what is perceived and what is seen. From the examples from the excursion yesterday in Sweden, how do we work in order, for instance, to incorporate carbon within the service provisions, and also how that relates to the value propositions that is part of the marketing and also the part of the service provisions in that sense, and how can we incorporate that? And in different ways, so services is then a driver not only of services itself, but it also has implications of behaviors and management that promote specific activities while including others. But trying to summarize some of the thought here, that is that we see that there is a small variations, although that partly growing in services and the different values that the service marketing is catering to. There's still strong institutions and large organizations that are big actors within this market, which potentially could then have the resources for change. But it's also, as we see, there is also risk for that is also a barrier to change and development, given that these type of structures are quite strong, and that in turn then constitute a barrier for what you would call a sort of a functional market, and a functional market that actually caters to the needs. And as we talked about before, the service as a social and cultural product, with the changing social settings and norms, we also see that there's an increased complexity and diversity in service provision, and how that relates to sort of changing relations, values, and also communications that we need to adapt to. And to do that, we also need to better understand forest owners, their decision making, and also sort of what services that is needed in relation to that. But it's also important to acknowledge also services and the service process as a source of knowledge, and knowledge production that is fruitful for developing companies and services. That is not only sort of a sales interaction in that sense, but it's also potentially a relationship that you could learn from. And then trying in different ways to get away from standards, that there are no standards. But we always comes back to this kind of the balance between the cost efficiency and the standardization, as we discussed before, versus this kind of relational and complex understanding of customers' needs and values. and how that relates to services and also the available resources that can be incorporated in this. And then the final point is then the first, how do we get them to participate in this process, where we have the empowerment as a potential that Paulina just talked about, but also that information and knowledge is not all, that there is a need for a more mutual relationship and engagement that incorporates people in this.